Plus with Warren Buffett, who's the chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. Right now, we're joined by Charlie Munger, who's the vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway.
स्टॉक मार्केट रिलेटेड इंटरव्यू वीडियो पाने के लिए मेरे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन को दबा दें।
You think private sector does it much better than the government sector. However, a lot of these people who are running also want to make government much bigger. Do you have a quarrel with that or no?
Well, as they say, if you love your post office, you're going to love socialized medicine.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily want to make it bigger in terms of redistributing. They may want to, the market system is brutal, and it leaves behind people who are perfectly wonderful people who don't have market-related talents. And
Or who are just unlucky.
Yeah, just plain unlucky. And in a rich society, believe me, if we have a war or something like that, we call on those people and pay them practically nothing to go fight for us. We want goods flowing, but it's going to displace the textile worker that we used to have and so on. So the function of government is not necessarily to get bigger. It may be in an important way to take care of people who, for one reason or another, get left behind in a market system that you also regard as essentially this huge source of wealth and goods and services.
So how do you fix the problems, or at least the perception of problems, which there's a huge perception out there in the American voting right now?
Obviously, it would help if our government were wiser. And it would be wiser if the two sides didn't hate each other so much. Anger drives out reason. And there is absolute cold fury between politicians on one side and politicians on the other. It's quite counterproductive. For that reason, I don't allow myself to get angry at politicians.
How would you fix it?
Well, I just don't let myself get that angry at politicians. I don't expect them to be
Berkshire
perfect.
has worked better because Charlie and I have never been mad at each other.
Yeah.
It just does. I mean, way better. If we got mad at each other, I'd try and kill his deals. He'd try and kill my deals. All that. It just doesn't work that way.
We don't need a couple of alpha males blustering at one another over this stuff. They ought to just cool it and take a little reputational hit and get the feathers rumpled down.
We ought to worry about the people that don't fit into the system. We want the system. And a lot of people are getting left further and further behind because as capitalism gets more advanced, it gets more specialized, and there actually is greater difference between the haves and the have-nots. And the haves can take care of the have-nots. And the interesting thing is both parties basically agree on that. They just...
Yes, how you get there, that gets complicated.
Income tax credit can make a huge jump in that direction. I mean, Social Security... we've done various things. Over the years, we have improved. We've improved the public school systems. We've improved things that do give people more of an equal chance and take care of people who fall by the wayside. We just got to keep doing it.
Bill, you've spent a lot of time on education in this country, trying to figure out how to fix it and how to make things work. What's the answer? If that's one of the problems, that we're not getting people the advantages they need before they get into that system, how do we fix that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think better education is so key to the United States living up to the dream of equal opportunity. And particularly as more and more of our students are in the inner city, coming from low-income households, we really have to take the best teachers, understand what they do, and spread that further. That is the best path to a stronger form of equality. The progress has been pretty modest, but there's a lot of smart people. It's not just technology. It's helping the teachers, finding out the ones who are doing things super well and spreading that around. Even the college system, we still have very high dropout levels, and the way you catch kids early when they get off track, some use of online. I'm hopeful in the education area, although progress has been slow.
Surprisingly slow?
Yes. When we compare the improvements in global health, which is the other big area for the Gates Foundation, to the improvement in education, education's proven to be tougher to make big gains over the last decade.
Was that what you expected when you got started?
No, it's actually the opposite. Because global health involved going out to poor countries whose governments are really weak, and there's not even stability, there's some corruption. We thought that would be the slow area to work in, but very important. That we've been surprised by how much progress there have been in the overall statistics, like cutting child to death in half. In education, although there's some points of light, some great schools, some are charter schools, some are using new curriculum, the overall figures, U.S. math scores, dropout rates, have moved only slightly.
Charlie, just getting back to your idea of people not hating each other so much and getting along, how do we make that happen? How do you try and push towards that? Because it seems like things have gotten
Well,
worse
I think
and
you
worse.
have to do it one relationship at a time. And of course, I think it would help if both parties did not commit suicide in the primaries. If we get these extremists on both sides and they take over each party, it's just awful. The California legislature has two kinds of people, rightist nutcakes and leftist nutcakes. They've kicked everybody else out. This is not a good system.
Why did it wind up like that, particularly in California?
Hatred. Lots of hatred.
Was it redistricting? I mean, how would you?
There was redistricting as part of it, but mostly it's just the wonderful product of hatred.
Gentlemen, just taking a look at what we've been watching with the markets today. Obviously, things are under a little bit of pressure today, but we have been looking at much higher markets if you go back to the Christmas Eve low, and the concern about what the Fed might or might not be doing. Since that time, the Fed has sounded much more dovish. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about your own take on the markets. And Bill, again, I've spoken with Warren and Charlie earlier about this a little bit. So how about your take? When you hear that the Federal Reserve is probably not going to be raising interest rates anytime soon, how does that change your outlook on equities, or equities versus treasuries?
Well, the interest rate is like gravity, and all these valuations are dramatically affected by it. At the start of the year, people didn't think the 10-year bond would be where it is today, and that's provided a lot of lift. So it was a big first quarter for U.S. equities. We still, if you look forward, are at these very high valuation levels. And so it's hard to see that the market will be gaining a lot over the next few years. I think people should have fairly modest expectations on what their portfolios will make in the years in front of us.
Have you changed your positions in your own portfolio as a result of this? Have you done any major?
No, it's a very equity-oriented portfolio. It's overweight in the U.S., even though it's got a lot of overseas exposure. It's a bullish portfolio that the American economy over time will do well. Fortunately, even if we have a few years here where markets are doing that well, we've been lucky. We have a cushion. The foundation continue to spend generously. Mm-hmm. But I'm amazed at how high the valuations are if you look broadly.
Charlie, do you think that?
Well, sure. I think that if you drive interest rates down to zero and all the countries print money like crazy, it's lifted the asset boat for everybody. And I think it really is. So they didn't have anything else to do in the Great Recession. And so they took the only weapon they had and used it aggressively. I don't think we should quarrel with that. It did cause the people who were already rich to get richer. But that wasn't done on purpose or anything like that. And I think that will correct automatically.
Do you think we should still be using that weapon aggressively, which is what President Trump would like to see happen? He wants them to cut interest rates again, I think he said by 1%, and also push up quantitative easing once again. Build up the
I am
balance sheet.
so afraid of democracy getting the idea that you can just print money to solve all problems. And eventually, I know that will fail. Singapore, which has a marvelous economy, has zero debt. If I were running the world, I would like the United States to be in that position. That is not the typical, that's nobody's position. No, all these politicians in Europe and America have learned to print money.
And if we keep at these extraordinary measures for the Fed, I guess not just the Fed here, but central banks around the globe.
Yes, but who knows when money printing runs out of control? And at the end, if you print too much, you end up in something like Venezuela.
You're not suggesting that happens anytime
No,
soon.
but I don't like the idea. And both parties, you get politicians say, what we've learned is we can print all the money we want.
Right.
We don't have to raise taxes, we just print.
Warren, you share those concerns?
Yeah, I probably could not have conceived of a world as recently as 10 years ago. I would not have conceived of a world where you would have full employment, 5% budget deficits, with actually the probability of those rising from that level, and at the same time have the long bond at 3%. I would have said that couldn't happen. And then people now, you have this modern monetary theory, which there's no question you should borrow, any country should borrow money in its own currency. I mean, that is not like it's some great discovery or something that's been announced, but
No, but it can be overdone.
yeah, and that's the point. I mean, that hasn't solved anything. Just to say, well, it's much safer to borrow money in your own currency, but the convergence of these factors would have seemed impossible to me, and generally, if I feel something is impossible, it's going to change over time. I don't know in what way, but I don't think we can continue to have these variables in this relationship. Now, if we can, then stocks are ridiculously cheap.
The one thing I will say, though, is this is a conversation I feel like we've had for at least 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Where you're watching and continuing to wait for these interest rates, the yields to rise. We're still sitting at 2.5% on the 10-year, which is shocking.
Yeah, and we're sitting with very, very little inflation with a Federal Reserve that put a target for 2% on it not that long ago. And it looks like nirvana. It looks like we found the promised land where we just essentially money doesn't cost anything, and you can print lots of money and have full employment and no inflation. And I would have thought that something would have happened before now. I don't know what would have happened, but I wouldn't think you could have these things at these levels, the long-term rates, inflation rates, budget deficits, and have that be a stable situation for a long period of time. And I still believe that, but so far I'm wrong.
So in the meantime, you haven't really changed how you...
No, I think stocks are ridiculously cheap compared, if you believe that you're going to have the 3% interest, 30-year bonds makes sense.
That's a big if, though.
That's what makes going to work interesting.
Well, this threesome is comfortable if everything goes down by 90%. So we're not a fair cross-section.
I'm sorry, Charlie, what was that?
I say this threesome is comfortable if everything goes down by 90%. It doesn't
stock
really
prices,
hurt us.
equities know the rest.
Yeah, but we wouldn't want that kind of a world happening to everybody else.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about healthcare? Because you all have spent plenty of time focusing on healthcare in the United States and abroad. Bill, you're probably the foremost authority on global healthcare. Your foundation has spent billions and billions of dollars on it. I think more than $13 billion just from inception through 2017 on global healthcare initiatives. What's the progress? You touched on it a little bit earlier, that you've seen more progress here than in the education front in the United States. How's that kind of shown up?
Well, it's phenomenal that by taking the new vaccines and getting them out to more kids, and a few other tools like malaria bed nets that we've gone from over 10 million children dying every year to now less than 5 million. Now 5 million is still a lot. We need a few more tools, but actually the pipeline of innovation looks very good. This is a phenomenally positive story that those deaths are way down, and that'll continue.
What's the thing that brings you the most hope or gives you the most hope about advancements that you've made or research that you've found?
Well, one that we're working on is to reduce malnutrition, because if a kid is growing well, their ability not only to avoid these diseases like diarrhea killing them, but also the degree to which they'll develop their full mental and physical capacities and therefore contribute for their own life, for their country's well-being. Dramatic reduction in malnutrition would be a huge thing, and we're now gaining understanding that we think that will be possible. It's been a long scientific journey having to do with the gut and inflammation and the microbiome, but now we see that we'll get more of those kids on their growth path. And so I'm super excited about that.
But malnutrition is not just them not having the food to eat. Even in cases where they do have the food to eat, there's a problem.
That's right. What happens is that because their diet doesn't have much protein in it, their gut, their intestines get into an inflamed state, and that means you get a set of bacteria in there that don't let them absorb nutrition. And so that's a downward path. And so you can see even two twins, one will get that and not be growing, and the other one will achieve normal growth. And so an intervention that stops the inflammation, shifts the microbiome to a more healthy mix, that would get rid of malnutrition for that child. So what is a really cheap intervention where you can see the problem and stop it?
With probiotics or something?
Yes, that's the kind of thing. Although those tend to be broad spectrum, here we're going to be, to make it, scale it up and have it be a cheap, probably a pill. It'll probably be a couple of vitamins and drugs.
Does that translate to things that could be useful here in the United States and other
Well,
developed
the basic understanding of your gut and will finally lead us to understand not just malnutrition, but overnutrition. Why is it so hard to control people's hunger? Over time, people have tried to have pills to control hunger. I'd say over the next decade, that will finally succeed. So even though that's not the foundation side, we're focused on malnutrition. The science of the gut and the microbiome has a lot of companies working on things that will reduce overnutrition.
Warren, back here in the United States, one of the big problems is trying to figure out how to pay for health care and stop some of the costs. That's a problem you've been focused on at Berkshire, along with JP Morgan and Amazon. What have you found? We haven't gotten any updates recently other than the name of this new organization is going to be Haven. Where are you on that process?
Well, we are taking the first step on what is bound to be a very long journey. I mean, I would say it's not more difficult than I expected, but I expected it to be ungodly difficult. And you have an industry which basically is about the same size as the U.S. government's receipts. And everybody always says every dollar in the budget, has a constituency, and every dollar in an industry expenditure has a constituency. And we've got the right person, we've got the right partners. Capital isn't the key part to it, but we've got people who are willing to spend the money. But we'll spend whatever money it takes if we're making progress, and it is going to be a long, tough pull to make major journey to make major changes, and there's, it has no guarantee of success or at all. But there's nobody, I think, that's in a better position in terms of number of employees and ability of the people that are partnering to get along and all kinds of things to perhaps come up with something that makes the system more efficient and we'll try, but it's nothing will happen quicker soon. There's no revolutionary move or anything of the sort, and there will be lots of opposition to any change. In interviewing people to run the place, we interview people in all aspects of the medical profession and or activity, and they all agreed 100%. This system needs change, but of course not my part, and that's very understandable. We expect that, and we'll find out what happens. But I know this: I would rather have the private sector come up with a solution than throw it all to government. And if the private sector doesn't come up with some solution to the increase in cost, quality is, in many ways, it's unbelievable. You're just hearing Bill talk about the advances that can be made. But it costs 5% of GDP in my lifetime, or even my adulthood, up to 18%.
Right.
The federal budget has stayed kind of constant around 17%. Everybody thinks it's out of control and all these terrible things. And here, federal receipts, I should say. And now this has gone from 5 to 18, and nobody really thinks it's going to stop.
Charlie, you've been, go ahead. You've been at Good Samaritan, the chairman there, for how many years?
Long for 40 years. If you take Singapore, which tends to have an intelligent government and do things right, they spend about 20% of what we spend on health care, and they're healthier. And there are all kinds of abuse and counterproductive activity they don't have in Singapore that we do have. And Warren is right. We're going to have a hell of a time getting in Singapore's direction because human beings are profiting over the existing system.
Right.
It may look like an unnecessary operation to me. In fact, it does. But to them, it looks like God's work.
Where would you suggest, after your years at Good Samaritan, where would you say focus here first?
I think this system is out of control. The deductibles in ordinary corporate health insurance are ridiculous. If you're a poor family and you get a $5,000 bill for a baby, that you don't have medical insurance. They just changed the system. And then if you take the utterly unnecessary treatment where people find a way to tap into these government streams of money and do a lot of unnecessary work like prolonging inevitable death and all kinds of ghastly things they do. I would say we have a pretty disgusting system. On the other hand, it's the best in the world in terms of its ultimate scientific capacity. But if you take all the unnecessary operations and all the unnecessary procedures and all the rackets in the thing, which Singapore is pretty well taken out, it's discouraging. As I look at Singapore, I look at the United States and think, how in the hell do we get from where we are to there? Right. And if you ask me what's going to happen, I think we're going to fail to get to an intelligence system.
Well, on that cheery note, we are just about out of time. If I can ask you, gentlemen, we have about a minute left. If I can just ask you what you're reading, because that's something we hear back from our viewers often. Warren, what are you reading right now?
I've just finished reading very recently, and I read it in one sitting. It captivated me so much. A book by Melinda Gates, which just came out very recently, and
it's a bestseller.
The Moment of Bliss. It is a terrific. It's a story, but it's learned much about the world that you should know, and I would say most people don't know. I mean, this is a story of her experiences. It's absolutely sensational.
Warren took all your time. Bill, I guess you're not upset about that.
I love the book.